Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and giallo enthusiasts. This is Tanner Leeser, your host for all things giallo here on The King in Giallo. Our next stop on our journey through giallo cinema is the second giallo film from Dario Argento, The Cat o' Nine Tails, released in 1971. This video is an edited down version. Herein, you will find the overview portion of the full-length video. Coming next week will be the complete deep dive with the review and GialliTally. This video may be watched entirely without any spoilers. Here is The Cat o' Nine Tails Overview. The Cat o' Nine Tails is an Italian, West German, and French co-production. I assume that makes perfect sense because the film has always felt like it has strong ties to the krimi and film noir genres. It is directed by Dario Argento, who also wrote the film, the script of which is based on a story by Luigi Cozzi, Dardano Sacchetti, and Brian Edgar Wallace. Music is by Ennio Morricone. The cast comprises Karl Malden as Franco Arno, James Franciscus as Carlo Giordani, Catherine Spaak as Anna Terzi, Pier Paolo Caponi as Superintendent Spimi, Hurst Frank as Dr. Brown, Cinzia De Carolisa as Lori, Rada Rasimov as Bianca Merussi, and Ugo Fangareggi as Gigi the Loser. The plot follows Franco Arno, a blind ex-journalist, who one night, while out walking with his niece, overhears an argument outside the Terzi Genetics Institute, where later that same night, a break-in is reported resulting in the assault on a guard. The strange thing is, nothing was reported stolen. Franco endeavors to solve the mystery with the help of a newspaper reporter, Carlo Giordani. Suspicious deaths and murders soon follow, as if someone is trying to silence others. The investigation leads the men down a path of possible industrial espionage and secret experiments conducted by a pharmaceutical company by its team of doctors, which becomes the main clue for the ensuing string of murders, and the aforementioned doctors, the primary people to talk to. As they go deeper, the men become targets themselves. Hot on the heels of the success of The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, Dario Argento was obligated to complete another giallo in very much similar fashion. The German co-financiers tried to get too involved with the plot and demanded a jet-set version of Bird, which infuriated Argento, who was trying to go in a new direction with the thriller, to the point that he lost all sight of what his new movie was going to be. The film remains Argento's least favorite of his films. What's interesting about Cat, in respects to Argento's Animal trilogy, is that it can both represent a growth in the young director and a transition between his debut work, Bird, which represents more of a classical approach to cinema, and his next film, Four Flies on Grey Velvet, which absolutely leans into the realm of outre cinema. Cat is a stepping stone in his early films, but quite honestly, when one looks at Argento's full filmography and the direction and overall execution of what much of those later films are showcasing, Cat ends up looking better in comparison while demonstrating Argento's style with an eagerness to experiment. Troy Howarth describes the film as working better when perceived as being episodic versus as a whole. As he puts it, the isolated elements of the narrative which are scattered about are more interesting than the main narrative pushing forward. This is evidence of Argento's attempts to sabotage his own film. The plot centered around industrial espionage is not the most engaging. Argento does take stands and stays clear of mimicry by avoiding the same explanation for the killer as was seen in the 1968 British thriller Twisted Nerve by the Bolting brothers, where it is explained that the main character's genetic abnormality is the root cause of his killer psychosis. As we find in Cat, the research being done by the Institute is fueled by the pursuit of this same idea that a chromosomal imbalance might lead to psychopathy, but it is not necessarily factual as much as suggestive, for the killer's belief in what the science could state actually propels them towards a mental break. This difference is subtle, but enough to separate it from the controversial reception which had plagued Twisted Nerve. As it stands, the film presents a handful of wonderfully eccentric episodes which entertain in their own separate ways, like comedy. In terms of giallo appeal, like sex and violence, the violence is certainly amped up from what was seen in Bird. A body rolls underneath a train, people are brutally garroted, and the moment that is singed into most people's memory involves a person sustaining brutal rope burns from trying to prevent themselves from falling down an elevator shaft by clutching at the metal cables. The film makes great use of darkness and shadows as individuals stalk through the seedy underbelly of the city. In comparison to Bird, it can also be said that Cat is less atmospheric and moody and more polished and efficient looking, suggesting the film may have been trying to reach an even wider audience. Argento masterfully makes this mainstream approach work in his favor as he proves himself to have an eye for film composition and camera movement, which would hold people's attention and command their focus. Ennio Morricone's score must also be highlighted, which oscillates from the melodic and dreamlike theme reminiscent of a lullaby to pieces which perfectly complement the more tense scenes of the film with discordance and intensity. The score perfectly heightens the tension without drawing the attention to the music itself. Karl Malden was a prominent member of the highly acclaimed Actors Studio, and his work here allowed him to perform in A Streetcar Named Desire, 1951, and On the Waterfront, 1954. Both films garnered him Oscar nominations, and the former earned him a win. Interestingly, both films are consistently brought up as representing the transition in film where acting pivoted from more of a theatrical influence to the more realistic approach which the Actors Studio promoted. Where my PCPA peeps at? Karl Malden kept on acting, never slowing, and before Cat, he had appeared in Patton, 1970, as General Bradley. Malden gives the role his all and doesn't hold anything back, which is most admirable when considering many trained actors could have seen the production at face value for being a low-budget Italian thriller directed by a relatively amateurish no-name. His performance makes him one of the most endearing characters in all of Argento's films and giallo cinema. Malden would wrap up his stint in European films with The Summertime, 1972, by Antonio Isasi. Back in the States, Malden would find his place on the television show The Streets of San Francisco, 1972 to 1977. He would work on through the 90s, but his pace would begin to slow. He passed away at the age of 97 in 2009. James Franciscus often is overlooked because of Malden's stellar performance, but in truth, Franciscus also gives one hell of a performance. He enjoyed a long acting career spanning the 1950s until he passed in 1991 at the age of 57 due to complications with emphysema. His legacy includes appearances in The Valley of Gwangi, 1969, and Beneath the Planet of the Apes, 1970. He made numerous TV appearances on The Twilight Zone and The Rifleman. Coincidentally, Franciscus would also play a blind amateur sleuth in the series Longstreet, 1971-1972. Catherine Spaak was in A Rather Complicated Girl, 1969, by Damiano Damiani. Other giallo veterans include Pier Paolo Caponi, who was last seen on the channel in The Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion, Tino Carraro, last seen in Orgasmo, and Hurst Frank in So Sweet, So Perverse. With each of these men portraying the mastermind in previous giallo films, it adds an extra layer of suspicion onto their characters when watching Cat. Also in the film are Umberto Rajo, who was in The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, as well as Fulvio Mingozzi, who would go on to make appearances in Deep Red, Tenebrae, and Suspiria. Here are some quick fun facts. The scene where Giordani meets Anna Terzi at her father's house is a reference to the scene in the novel The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler, where Marlowe first meets Vivian Regan at her father's house. Portions of the dialogue are verbatim. During the nighttime burglary at the Terzi Institute, a doctor can be clearly heard whistling Ennio Morricone's tune from Dario Argento's movie The Bird with the Crystal Plumage 1970's opening. The title, The Cat o' Nine Tails, does not refer to a feline or a kind of whip, but the number of leads to follow in the attempt to solve the murders. Giordani's silver sports car is a 1960 Porsche 356B Coupe. In 2020, this car could be worth $100,000. The blue car that Anna drives is a 1967 Fiat Dino Spider. In 2020, in good condition, this car could be worth $100,000 or more. Dario Argento and Dardano Sacchetti together mapped out the plot for The Cat o' Nine Tails and split the writing of the screenplay between them. However, because the production was set up on the basis of the first 40 pages of the script, and those pages were all written by Argento, Argento demanded that he receive sole screenplay credit. Being credited for story alone meant a substantial pay cut for Sacchetti, so this set off a bitter and publicized dispute between Sacchetti and Dario and Salvatore Argento, the film's producer and Dario's father. A longer edit was shot for the film in which Laurie and Franco are reunited. This is followed by an epilogue in which Giordani, still recovering from his injuries inflicted during the climax, is called at his apartment early in the morning to investigate another murder. Anna is shown to be living with him. Dario Argento cut these scenes after Luigi Cozzi declared them too American, although a promotional still showing a bandaged Giordani in bed with Anna exists. All footage that was shot for these scenes is believed to be lost. Thank you for watching this overview-only video. Don't miss the full overview, review, and GialliTally for The Cat o' Nine Tails next week. As of right now, you can find the movie streaming on Tubi, Plex, and for a small fee on YouTube and Amazon Prime Video. Also, it is streaming in its entirety on Dailymotion. Don't forget to like this video and join me next week to see the rest of this review. Comment your predictions for the AZ score for the movie and the final GialliTally score. Please like this video, share it with your friends if they are horror fans or cinephiles, subscribe to The King in Giallo if you haven't yet, and if you have any questions, thoughts, curiosities, or concerns, leave those below in the comments section and I will get back to you. Give The King in Giallo a follow on Instagram and a like on Facebook. Subscribe to the King in Giallo Patreon to see early access to my videos, with some videos able to be seen up to 3 weeks or more in advance, plus exclusive content found only there such as the viewings, podcasts, Let's Plays for Giallo-inspired games, and book reviews for Giallo-inspired books. Thank you very much for your continued support. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.
E culo riccio, questo mosso sturdo!